Last time, Sam, I was telling you about the experiences that we had with crystal gazing, and I thought I would read you some more and tell you the things that happened, because I found it very interesting, and I think other people have found it interesting too. So, and I also mentioned the Voynich manuscript, which I would love to know what other people thought about that. That it's an energy binary code, which was very new to me when I had the information. And very often when I ask Robin for information, I eventually get a response. Sometimes it can take a month or two, sometimes I can get it immediately. And he does say that he will answer questions eventually when he's feeling stronger and life's not quite so hectic, because he has got his bungalow to finish and a few other things, and plus the work that he does outside, because he is a builder. So let's get on with the stories and wait for whatever comes through. I haven't heard any more. Of course, he's not been 100%, so he hasn't given me any further information. But I always wait anxiously for the next lot, because I never know what's coming. But I have been going through a lot of my files recently, and I found a few interesting things which I will mention at the end. I was looking for one particular one, which was the death of Princess Diana. Do you think I could find it? I must have sat for 2 hours last night going through all my files, and I could not find it. So obviously I'm not meant to mention that today. But I have got something on 9/11 that we were given, so I will speak about that. And I found a little something about world peace, which is not what I thought world peace was. Anyway, we shall get on with the storytelling, and I'll add bits as I come across them. So last week I got as far as the communicator, the mark on the communicator's head, if I remember rightly. And I mentioned that in 1994, Margo left quite suddenly, and this was all happening, of course, a long time before that, in the early 90s, 1991. So I will continue with what happened. This was in March, the 10th of March, 1991. Margot saw a white-haired man. And remember, these words are the exact words that Margot and Mary gave me. I've not altered them in any way, or exaggerated them, or put them in better English, or anything like that. It's just as they spoke to me after the experience that they had. So these are her words. She saw a white-haired man with a wavy, square-shaped beard appear in her crystal, who said he would guide her through the evening's experience. Standing in front of the Sphinx, she had the impression that it was breathing. But then she realised it was due to the vibrations caused by 3 discs appearing. Now, when I mention the word discs, these are what we now know as UFOs, and I shall continue to call them UFOs because that's what they are. But of course here they referred to them as discs. A voice from one said, "My ancestors came from Atlantis." Another voice from the second disc stated, "I came from another planet, and we started life on this planet Earth." Various people were milling around, including one with a pointed head. I've mentioned the people with the pointed heads before. And I know that there have been some discoveries of corpses with these strange heads. She returned to the building on the hill that she witnessed last week. It was a granite pyramid with fires on either side of the large square entrance. there was a massive figure of 8 pathway made of crystals, and she explained to me that it was as long as Dudley Road in Ventnor. So that's quite a long road. And it was for an important ceremony, with an abundance of yellow and pink lilies growing around the crystal path. A group of Inca women came riding by. All had long dark hair and were dressed in flowing embroidered robes. Their leader rode a beautiful white horse, and Margot followed them into the pyramid. But the women had disappeared, and she found herself alone in a very large room. And a voice said, "You will return here." Meanwhile, Mary was standing on the sand beside crystals, standing 50 feet high. Travelling to the top of one of them, she looked down to see a little dot beside one that she knew to be herself. Returning to the ground, she met a tall man dressed in white, with long white hair, carrying a shepherd's crook in his hand. This reminds me of Gandalf from Tolkien's trilogy, Lord of the Rings. Mary followed him into one of the crystals, where she could see a long, winding path ahead, and noticed the crystal seemed like ice as she walked upon it. Looking to the left, she could see Egypt outside the crystal, and yet, to the right, there was another civilization altogether, with entirely different kinds of people. As Mary followed in the footsteps of the old gentleman, she queried who he was. Whereupon her Inca guide, man of God, flashed alongside, and she took this to mean they were one and the same. He never once looked back as they approached the 6-sided pyramid. Mary remarked, "It's only granite," to which he replied, "Nothing is just only." The pyramid was huge inside. There were many peoples and cultures with so much going on, and she wondered how this could be. Suddenly it all vanished, and she was alone with the old gentleman in a circular room with light shining through from the crystal overhead. Mary sat in a granite chair with a low back and sides, and before her, in a half circle round the room, were small square discs set in the wall, and a choice was offered. Where in time do you wish to go? She tried to figure out what would be the most exciting time, but was quite unable to make a decision. So finally, she just looked at one and chose that. The square disc became a large screen on which was portrayed a jungle scene with steam rising from a swamp. She could smell the bog and feel the heat and hear birds singing and see faces peering from behind the trees. A triangle of light appeared, and the thought came, "Where am I here?" And a voice replied, "This was at the beginning of time, and because you communicated with the earth, the stones, and all natural things, you were part of them that came from another planet." We were enjoying a cup of tea afterwards and discussing all that had been witnessed, when Mary's little Yorkshire terrier, Lottie, wandered in with something on her beard. It was only a dried pinky orange lily petal, yet another apport from our ancient past and further proof for us. A petal from the lilies growing around that crystal path, viewed by Margo. The magic of life, if you're prepared to accept it, is absolutely wonderful. you can't really remain totally human when you know about these things, because you look outside and you see everybody going about their business and you think, I'm not like that, and I've got all this knowledge in my head. My sister said to me yesterday, actually, she'd been listening to the last episode I did, and she said, I can't believe you've got all this knowledge in your head, Carolyn. I said, yes, I have. And I said, it's just magical, all of it. I said, I live in this magical world. However, sometimes I have to come back down to earth. This was St. Patrick's Day, 17th of March, 1991. And before going to see Mary, I was impressed to give her something Irish, but unable to think of anything in my possession that she might like. And being drawn to the small cupboard in my desk, I spied a little black bog pot about an inch high, decorated with harp and shamrock, which was meant for her. And Mary placed a small quartz crystal in the little bog pot and held it, along with her communicator crystal, and appropriately found herself in Ireland in a bog owned by her uncle. And then she was in another one, where she actually entered right down into the bog itself, and although it was black, she was quite able to see all the growth going on down there. The crystal suddenly gave a flash of light, and she was back on the surface again. She returned to her grandmother's bog and viewed it from above. The scene changed to somewhere in the west of Ireland, where she had once lived before, and felt pain in her face. And the crystal said, "You had a very hard life here." Another change of scene. She found herself on a beach where there were huge crystals on the sand as big as her cottage. Mary seemed to be the same height and was looking down on people dressed in short white tunics at the base of the crystals. On querying where she was, the answer came, Atlantis. There were 2 huge crystals that met overhead in the centre, and beautiful, exotic, strongly perfumed flowers and shrubs grew in the vicinity. The weather was warm, and there was such a feeling of peace and love amongst the people she saw. Margot found herself on a beach, collecting crystal shells, similar to cockle shells, which she put in a leather drawstring bag and gave to one of the tall-headed men as an entrance fee into a building that housed a pool filled with silver-coloured fish, like fan-tailed goldfish. Leaving there, she found herself in India, in front of a large golden idol with smoke issuing from its forehead. A warning voice said, come away, this is Shiva, the destroyer." Departing hurriedly, she came upon a field of exotic, highly perfumed flowers of all colours, completely unknown to her, and made her way towards a large crystal in the field that was suddenly struck by a huge flash of blue lightning. The crystal split, releasing from within thousands of small crystals with the joyous sound of tinkling laughter. And they were heard to say, "This is what we have been waiting for. Now our work can begin." Margo and Mary both experienced a place of exotic perfumed flowers and large crystals during that evening. So maybe they were both in Atlantis. This was on the 23rd of March, 1991, and it's entitled Ahmed and the Amethyst. Margot, Wally and I had been instructed by her guides to visit a small church to the west of the island at Brook. And here we heard from a very interesting young man in spirit, whose name was Ahmed. He told us that when he was 18, he had been a camel boy, handy with a shovel and pick, and had been employed by Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter during the excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun, and helped remove all the treasures. Afterwards, he had felt the need for solitude and had gone to the Valley of the Kings, where he noticed a certain part of the desert was a darker brown colour, and in this area he found crystal stones of quartz and amethyst. I seem to remember that he said there were dunes on one side and rocks on the other. While resting with the crystals in his hand, he experienced a vision of a huge amethyst crystal buried beneath the sand where he was, and was told the crystals were for vision, talking with spirits, and for healing. On his return to Egypt, he used the stones wisely, with the result he became quite a wealthy man in comparison with his humble beginnings, and was able to make sure his family had a comfortable standard of living. He said he would bring one of his stones for Margo and would place it somewhere between the car and the seat where we were sitting. It was a pyramid-shaped piece of amethyst, and Margo found it beside a stone. Ahmed was not earthbound or a ghost, but he had been told he would be able to speak with us at Brook Church, to which so many earthbound are drawn because of the power of the stone. Ahmed understood that the huge amethyst was the most powerful thing on earth, and if ever discovered, its power would be used correctly. So the following evening, Ahmed's crystal was placed in the centre of the room. Margo found herself walking on hot sand in the desert and came across an enormous amethyst, described as larger than Dudley Road car park opposite Mary's house. Now that's some size amethyst. She seemed to float into the crystal, feeling an unexpected softness inside as she followed an upwardly ascending golden spiral. There was a very loud roaring sound, like a waterfall, and she heard the heartthrob of the stone. Silver flashes were being emitted all around the top of the golden spiral. Many different types of people were visible. A man with an aquiline nose, pointed chin, and spiky brown hair growing forwards. A black man, and a light brown-skinned woman with snowy white frizzy hair. Margo was told that she'd been there before and would return there again. She knew Mary was also present, but didn't see her. On entering a small facet of the amethyst, a beautiful golden snake approached her, which she felt such love for and allowed it to glide all over her. Outside the massive amethyst were many strange animals and flowers, all unrecognisable, and that strong perfume again. Mary, meanwhile, was travelling up the Suez Canal in a boat, looking at palm trees and people walking along the banks. She seemed to fly off the ship onto the desert and called out that she wished to see the amethyst that Margo had brought a piece of. Whereupon there was a terrific roaring sound and up from the sand came the enormous amethyst in its raw state. And she described it exactly as Margot had. She said it was about the size of Dudley Road car park. She entered the amethyst, and inside were all the facets and apexes one would see on the outside. Then she walked up a long entrance to a chamber where the brothers were standing dressed in monks' habits, and as usual she was not able to see their faces as their hoods covered them. The one standing in the centre said, "Welcome, brother. You have entered the heart of the amethyst." Mary sat down in a crystal chair and was aware that Margot was sitting beside her in another chair. She asked the brother, "Why isn't Carolyn here?" Whereupon I materialised directly in front of him. Mary said, "It's a pity that she cannot see what we see. And why can't she?" And with that, he picked up a crystal wand, circled it very quickly around my body, and a gold and silver mummy shape appeared around me. He told her I was one of the brothers who had abused the knowledge and the power of crystals on Atlantis. And this time it was my choice not to see and not to have the knowledge. And with that, it was as if a net or cobweb was in front of me. Mary asked what stone to give me in order to help. He made some gesture, but she didn't understand. Mary said, "But she does want to see what we're doing now." She and Margot arose and walked together back down the corridor. On looking at Margot, she said, "Good gracious me, you've got tall and slim, and you've got beautiful long black hair." "You look different too," Margot replied. And with that, Mary came out of the amethyst crystal to hear the thunderous roar as the mineral went back down into the sand. Picking up a handful of sand, she was convinced it was still in her hand when she returned to the sitting room, and was most disappointed to find that not even a grain was in her palm. Mary and Margot both experienced the reality of the massive amethyst crystal Ahmed had spoken of. Another mystical evening spent gazing into the crystals. The reason has been given why I do not have the visionary gifts that belong to my friends. Apparently it has been my own choice. I do not see in this particular incarnation. However, I have been blessed to meet up with them again and be their scribe and receive the knowledge, the recording of which is my passion. Visitors from the stars and pyramid construction. Entering a pyramid, Margot saw two large statues of cats. Then a real cat walked in front of her. There was a pharaoh in a headdress similar to a brass ornament standing on Mary's table, who told her that those from the stars that visited Earth had taught his ancestors how to build the pyramids, the foundations of which had to have amethyst and crystals in them. She floated over a city of many buildings, small pyramids and dome-shaped structures. And then she was down on the ground among a group of people, one of whom she knew to be Mary as a man. He was about 6 feet tall, with dark brown shoulder-length hair, tanned skin, and dressed in a grey sleeveless robe. There was a very large pot into which he was putting pieces of crystal and grey agate and adding a thick green liquid. Another man spoke, saying he was a healer, and the mixture the man was making would give great power, suggesting that Margot used crystal and grey agate together when scrying, as this would enable her to see more. Interesting. Mary found herself back in the Arizona desert, but strangely she noticed, if she looked behind, it was in Egypt. Deciding to concentrate on Arizona, the first thing she saw was lush green vegetation for miles and miles, with a river to her left. The whole area was triangular in shape, and at the apex she could see a round craft where the tall, thin men with pointed heads were entering and leaving. On inquiring about the vegetation, it all vanished. The men told her that when they came to the planet, they put the pyramid there, and she could see a huge stepped pyramid, the base of which appeared to be about 40 feet high. The same pyramid was shown in 3 different ways. Firstly, with statues all round, and then with rounded columns. "Why?" asked Mary, and was told it was 3 dimensions, representing 3 civilizations. She thought, where are they all now? Whereupon everything went barren, and the pyramid went right down into the desert with a terrific rumbling sound. The pyramid had gone on its side as it submerged into the sand, and this accounted for the shape of the vegetation, as it was growing above the pyramid that is still sending out its vibration. From far above the earth, Mary was shown the lush green vegetation that she had originally seen, and it will be again. Remember Isaiah chapter 35, verse 1? "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." Querying how the pyramids were erected in the beginning, Mary saw an Inca and one of the tall-headed men with a whole crystal rod in their hands. They pointed the crystal rod, and in front of them appeared the triangular shape of a pyramid, with many smaller ones behind it. These were transparent, and she was able to see through them. Archaeological proof of the tall-headed beings. I might add here that when we were receiving all this information in 1991, we had no access to the internet, and my life was so busy I had no time to refer to libraries for confirmation. Archaeologists had not yet discovered the skulls of the tall-headed men as described by Mary, that now corroborate these experiences. Skulls have been discovered in Peru that fit the description of the tall-headed men that Mary and Margot saw so often. Down in Peru, particularly on the Paracas Peninsula, researchers have been finding some very large skulls that are extremely ancient. These skulls have also been found in Egypt and Malta. All these skulls lack the median knitting and have only 1 parietal plate rather than 2. It recently came to light that similar skulls have been found in the vicinity of Stonehenge, and Maria Wheatley has been speaking of these finds, one in particular known as the Queen of Stonehenge. And she has written a book, and it's called The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge by Maria Wheatley. If anyone's interested in looking that up. The 6th of April 1991 Visit to Uranus. Mary asked to be taken back to another time and found herself going backwards through a tunnel that widened the further back she went, until she found herself directly over the apex of a pyramid and the visible crystal capstone. She stood on a round crystal disc and, holding onto the crystal handrail, was taken up into space until she could no longer see the earth, only clouds and sky. Mary had difficulty in breathing and was gasping for air. A small round craft appeared, and 3 or 4 robed people came around her and very quickly took her into the craft. Mary could see no one in there, but as it went off at speed, she was standing looking at it and realised she was astral projecting and must get back to the spacecraft. The door opened and she stepped out into a picturesque scene with waterfalls and Egyptian-type people. A voice said, "This is Uranus on the other side of the galaxy." Mary asked to see the rest of the planet, which was in darkness, and was told she wouldn't like to see it. Querying, "Why darkness?" the answer came, "When the people stopped communicating with the architect of the universe, this is what happened." The place was complete blackness. There seemed to be a wall of darkness. And she heard, "When people communicated with the spirit of the universe, light would shine on the darkness again." So important to maintain your relationship with the Creator. The light area was very small in comparison to the size of the planet, and Mary felt crystals were somehow involved. She re-entered the spaceship, returned to the crystal ring, and finally back to the top of the pyramid, with no difficulty in breathing on the return journey. Margo described her next experience as very strange when holding grey agate and crystal. There was a very large square door leading into a pyramid that went deep into the centre, where she saw many, many creatures. A fox with silver eyes, a bat, and a man with the head of a bird. A fair-haired man wearing a green robe. And he said, "Look around you and be sure you notice everything." Margot looked again and saw many urns full of stones. In particular, a piece of white coral with golden circles about the size of a 2p falling all over the fingers of the coral. He spoke again to the effect that golden circles in the stones bring power, but she was unable to recall the exact words. She later asked help from her guide, Mary Anning, and wrote, "Golden-coloured circles falling into stones give off great power to all who see and experience the wonder of it." Sensing a feeling of warmth, she pulled herself out from the agate and the crystal stones to see golden circles falling everywhere, all over Mary and me and into Mary's bowl of stones. And when Margot saw a silver light shine over one of them, Mary put her hands in the stones and drew out a golden-coloured ring, the third apport. On this occasion, Mary couldn't get away from Ireland and saw triangles over the sea at Skull, one pointing up, one down, and surrounded by a circle of light covering both the triangles and Mary. She began to see streets and places and everyday sights, and found herself floating in a ball of light. Then found herself beside a pyramid, walking on the desert, with many pyramids in the distance. She was lifted up on the ball of light and triangles, and had the experience of being everywhere at once, a sensation described as strange, as if she were dead. Was she in an orb, perhaps? Margot could hear tinkling sounds as she entered a pyramid, and noticed a camel, a horse, 2 cats and a dog, and wondered where the people were. The animals changed into babies. One became a young girl, dressed in bridal attire with a beautiful lace veil, who told her they are able to change their form, but in reality they are crystals. Then she was in Peru with the bride, who was holding out 2 lovely crystals that said, "We are the source, the power, and the beginning," and was given the definition of a crystal: the blood, compassion, and truth of the Earth Mother, and the wisdom, sperm, and strength of the Earth Father. So that was the definition of a crystal that we were given. Mary sat gazing into her crystal and saw a cat and thought, "Oh no, not a cat." Whereupon the familiar face appeared, and the crystal told her it could take many forms, and she'd better join her friend Margo in Egypt, where the heavy beat of drums and plodding feet could be heard. It was like a funeral march, but no people were visible. She walked into what appeared to be a glass pyramid shining brightly in the sun. Yet inside it was crystal and 6-sided. The Om was echoing around the crystal, the sound blending with the crystal itself. There was an extremely large formation of 12 great crystals in a circle, with one in the centre. Mary stood beside the central crystal and asked to see its form, but the crystal replied it could take any form. An Indian flashed into her mind, and out of the crystal stepped an Indian chief in full headdress. Asking to see its original form, Mary was informed she had already seen it and been shocked by the sight. She didn't remember, and the reply came that the memory had been erased from her mind, but she was shown the scalp of the original form. A head with foot-long tentacles all over. Not the face, just the back of the head. Originally, they came from another planet and had been attracted to the brightness of Earth. Some went to Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria, and he chose to go to Lemuria. Their form changed as they became aware of vanity and the greed for power. They all changed. The tentacles vanished first and became more refined. The first refinement was a cat-shaped face, some like ordinary cats, others similar to Siamese cats. And toward the end of the Atlantean era, they became long, tall, slender beings. When the time came for the end of Atlantis, the beings on Mu and Lemuria crystallized themselves and went deep into the Earth's surface, where they are still, in the 6-pointed pyramid beneath the ground. We are walking the Earth today, watching all that happens. The central being was standing on a 6-pointed star. On gazing into the crystal once more, Mary noticed the triangle on its surface and was told this is very significant and that further information would be given on it. It's the 1st of June 1991 and I've headed this The Funeral Cortege. Mary saw a box resembling a coffin being carried. She was in it, yet at the same time aware of watching the scene. Women dressed in black and wearing veils accompanied the coffin. Mary entered a chamber in the pyramid, yet was able to view the outside also, where many people gathered around the entrance. The coffin was placed in a particular part of the chamber. Two great men with huge arms, naked from the waist up, were standing beside it, and each carried a thick sword about 2 feet long, with a piece cut out of the blade. The handles appeared to be made of interlaced marble. The women in black formed 3 to 4 circles around the whole chamber and circled around it. The Om echoed through the chamber, followed by tongue wailing. The door slammed. Now they were all perfectly still, no movement whatsoever. There came the noise of sand entering the chamber, which reached right up to their chins, and no one stirred. All remained perfectly still. Not a muscle moved. She went outside and heard all the people sounding the Om and wondered what was happening inside. The sand had slowly covered everyone, including the 2 men standing beside the coffin. This all happened in total silence. No movement, no struggle for breath, and Mary wondered how on earth this could be. Very strange experience for Mary, that was, because she felt she was in the coffin and yet she was watching the whole experience. Entering a pyramid, Margo climbed a crystal spiral staircase into a pyramid-shaped room, where she met a man with a beautiful serene face, a pointed beard and long dark hair. Hundreds of tiny silver spirals were flying around his head. This was the master, who inquired if she would like to see the heart of the crystal. There was a rounded metal door opening into what she could only describe as a cupboard, inside which she observed light falling like golden rain. The master asked her to place her hand underneath, but as she did so, the golden rain seemed to vanish, at which point she left and climbed a hill from where she could view the volcano in the Philippines, erupting with flames and lava and smoke. The master said, "You have seen the heart of the crystal, and now you are seeing the rage of earth." This was received on the 16th of June 1991, the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century, and by far the greatest eruption to affect a densely populated area, occurred at Mount Pinatubo on June the 15th, 1991, in the Philippines. A demonstration of the rage of the earth. Well, I think I'm going to finish there, because that has just reminded me of the rage of the earth that we are at present watching and seeing everywhere. The volcanoes, the one that's just exploded from under the sea near Tonga, and the one on La Palma. This is the rage of the earth, and it's the rage of the earth because of what man is doing to the earth, and will continue as long as man continues to desecrate and spoil our wonderful home here. We're just getting warnings over and over and over again, and here it is. It's the rage of the earth that is happening. So I will leave you there with that story. I will continue next time we meet. But in the meantime, I have sorted out a few things from Robin. One of which is entitled World Peace, which I thought was very apt for this particular day as what's going on in the world today. This was given to us in June 2014. World peace, as we know it, is an energy form, a thought pattern, an acceptance of what many might like or many might not like. What is world peace? If we actually take the word apart, it has got world and peace. The peace of the world. What is it that people or man want? In fact, what is it that the energy form wants? The truth behind this is everybody wants a different peace, but a different format of understanding behind the peace that they have. So world peace is different to every single individual. So why would everyone expect everyone's thoughts to be the same? We are all having and carrying different energy forms about what it is that we need to do on this planet, some of which are complementary towards the surroundings, some of which are less than complementary. But everyone's energy has a job. This is a little bit like the man who clears the dustbins up. It is not a nice job, but it has to be done. Or the man that cuts the roses for the Queen. Lovely job. End result, beautiful, enlightening. But all jobs in themselves aren't necessarily deemed pleasant. So the peace of thought an individual has is his or hers, and only that personifies exactly what it is that that energy form is moving towards. You must accept that what your thought forms with regard to world peace, or your peace of the world, will be very different to your neighbour, and certainly different to the person next door to you. So therefore just accept what it is that what you want will always be different to somebody else. So in truth, it is just about being what you want to be, no more, no less. And this is Robin speaking, remember? And as I speak, I see a spiral. But this spiral isn't spiralling. It is lots of hoops going down like a trumpet. And at the end of that trumpet, what I actually see is a word. And that word is integration. Integration is the word. Integration within yourself. Integration within the thought patterns that you have. Integration with the acceptance and energy you carry. No more and no less. So if you ask to be integrated with your energy form, what you will be is integrated with the form of energy that you need, and with the form of energy that you need accepted within yourself. You will not ask anyone to change the way that they are, because they will be integrated or not with the acceptance of what their job is. The Aboriginals, many moons ago, used to allow things to happen that would seem to be totally and utterly unworldly to you or me with the sublime living processes we have. They seem somewhat draconian in their thoughts, but an Aboriginal being was in touch with himself and the planet. The terraformer communicated with him, and he communicated with the terraformer. He communicated with the animal kingdom, with the nature kingdom, and he also communicated with the stars and the astral frequencies that our visitors came from. They knew they had descendants not only from here, but from elsewhere. So they were the originals in the format of peace that they wanted. Yet, their peace was interfered with by somebody else's peace, and the newbies to their continent came and interfered with them to the point where they could no longer exist outside in the world. So the Aboriginals went inside. They internalized what it was that they had. The only thing man couldn't take away were their thoughts. So that is what they are left with. Memories and thoughts, fables and folklores. So that is all that has been left to us by our descendants, our predecessors, fables and folklores. But what is actually happening is the book of knowledge is being reawakened, not within man, but within yourself. The book of understanding, the book of choices, the book of truth, your truth, and everyone's truth. Yes, of course we all come from the same place, but we don't all drive the same vehicle. It would be a very dull place if we all did the same thing, wore the same clothes, and shone the same light. So we are indeed differentials, all muddling along together. But what we have a problem with is we grate with others, and they grate with us. Just accept that what you do that seems pleasant may be totally unpleasant to somebody else. So it is about shining your light and being your light, no more or less. Expect nobody to believe what you say, and don't believe anything anyone else says. But if something sits with you, work with it, stand with it, enjoy with it, and take it on board. And if it stays with you for a while, so be it. It is like a visitor. Comfort it whilst it is there, and allow it to go when it needs to go. That is what friends and visitations are all about. Nothing is permanent, and nothing ever will be permanent. Foundations are for houses, fixed structures. My children, you are not fixed structures. You do not need foundations. What you actually need is the flamboyancy to be able to fly, to be able to move around, and be acceptance in itself personified. You are cells that require permanent movement, like the fluidity of water, like the fluidity of air, like the fluidity of love. So, my children, for this day, world peace is not your peace or anyone else's peace. It is something that actually accepts within yourself that you are part of a fluid movement of love. So for today, we speak of love and we send you love. So with joy in your hearts, God bless you and thank you. That wasn't what you were expecting, was it? Not at all. So peace is something very individual, and my peace is not necessarily your peace or anybody else's peace, and it certainly isn't world peace, because someone across the world doesn't think of peace in the same way. And another little thing I was going to read you, we were in the middle of doing some channeling in, it was the 6th of the 10th, 2001, and there were a few of us sitting for this particular channeling, and it was, they were actually talking about the family and the importance of family to us. And suddenly, we'd been doing a little meditation as well, by the way, before this channeling. And then Robin was speaking, and then he suddenly said, I just think there is an unfoldment going on at the moment. And if it involves losing 6,500 lives up the World Trade Center, for the world to open up a little bit, maybe those are some of the reasons for those manifestations to occur. Bearing in mind that the people that are dead are okay, they are fine. During the meditation, plonk, he says, it comes in. A vast majority of people will never be found underneath that rubble. They are not there. Now that is what came to me, he said. They were taken before. A lot of bodies won't be found. There were 6,500 people. They are not finding any body. Where are they? Now he gave that number, 6,500 people, and he gave it twice. Now that has never been given as the figure that of the number of people who died in that. But I'm giving it as it came, and I have to accept that that's what came through, and I always give what comes through regardless of what my personal thoughts about it are. It's an interesting thing. I think a great deal more detail will come out about that to those who read between the lines and are sceptical about the truth. It matters not realistically whether that was a man-made event or whether it was just an event that occurred via terrorism. Terrorism, or whatever it may be, is another format of the world being able to put things in place. But we need not dwell on that. It has happened, and it is another outpouring of grief. People being able to cry about things, like the death of Lady Diana allowed that to happen. The fact that it is a financial centre has a great deal to do with it. He was continuing with the channeling after those words, and then Robin has always said that he will never do ordinary, what he calls spiritualist type of channeling from someone who's dead. Just he's not interested in that type of mediumship at all. But occasionally he has done so. He's done so for his family and my family. And obviously he was being spoken to while he was channeling. He was getting another voice coming in over and above the information that he was channeling about. And this is what came through. Good evening, friends. It was mentioned earlier that there are many peoples. And Robin, this is Robin then. Well, I'm going to have to say this wherever it is coming from. The world in horror sat there and watched all the and Robin interrupts again. This is difficult for me. He went on to say how many years ago he had made a conscious choice not to work with fourth dimensional energy, and as a result finds it very difficult to bring through the lower energies. The voice that was speaking was that of an American who had passed in the World Trade Center and wished to communicate the experience. The manifestation of a lot of mind formats was programmed at that point, of many deaths at that point. These people that were allowed to die at that point were allowed to transitionalize from one existence to another very quickly. It was their choice at that point in time. And you have a few latent properties that have stayed behind to channel information to those within centres of channeling, just to allow the thought processes of many of those that sat. Many, at the point of collapse of the towers, were immediately removed. The manifestation of the physical element will not be found in many cases. This is what is going to be very difficult, and it will be covered up, my children. No bodies will be found in the spectrum of existence that we are expecting to find. Vaporization will be the accusation of the occurrence. We have at least 200 physical bodies that will be found. Those physical bodies are the ones that chose to stay behind and stay within the family spectrum. That family spectrum can explain at this point basically means that they did not wish to leave the planet and the karmic influences and the circle of third and fourth dimension. They also made the choice that they will channel to those with the ability to receive that information about the occurrence of September the 11th. There is an awful lot more to come via those elements, which is and will be important to those that worship the third dimensional element. We do not worship the third dimensional element as such, so therefore we do not necessarily need to rationalize on the information that is contained. But it is so very important for true information to come through on that purpose. The child that sits finds it very difficult to channel on low-level information and has made that choice, so therefore it is very difficult for him to do that other than his own family members. The American now begins to speak, and I might tell you this came through in a very strong American accent. I can't do it, and I won't do it, because the Americans who listen would be a bit upset with me. If you wanted me to tell you further received information that we have via the levels of collapse. Many people at that point were initially removed. We were seeing a different picture than the television screens and those that were experiencing it in your third dimension. We did not experience it. We were all escorted out of the building, and we were taken via a different time frequency to be removed from this level of dimension. What experience we had at that moment in time was a total level of acceptance that was happening to everybody within the buildings. Many managed to escape this because it was not their choice. We did not need to linger on the fact that many people suffered, because sufferance, again, as has been echoed this evening via the channels elsewhere, has just been echoed that it is not necessary. It is not necessary. I wish to thank you for listening. If you wish to tune into this level of channel, you can do that yourselves. The information is there. Thank you. And then Robin was given a little message. At this moment, so that was what was said. Now, in another book that I read many years ago, and it was called The Awakening Letters, and it was by Lady Cynthia Sands and Rosamond Lehman, and this spoke about a fire that happened many years ago in a holiday resort where many children died. And the incidents referred to here about them being taken into a different time frame was exactly what happened there. And Florence Nightingale was a relation of Lady Cynthia Sands. And it was Florence Nightingale who came and took these children away from what was happening, the big fire that was happening in this, I can't remember where it was. And so this verifies that happened in exactly the same way, that somebody came or some beings came and they took all these people who had chosen not to come back into the third dimension again, and they'd taken them away into a different timeline. So they experienced nothing of what we were seeing, nothing of the suffering that we were seeing. And I just found it amazing that we were told this information. And I'd already read about it so many years ago. Of course, Robin didn't know anything about that. So that was what actually happened when the towers went up. Most of the people were taken away from it all. We just sat there in horror, as he said earlier on. The world sat in horror and watched. But we don't know what goes on in different dimensions. And then it just said, at this moment in time, for us to experience the needs of the third dimensional frequency, some of the elements, the old elements in which we have dismissed, the child being one of them, of channeling via third and fourth dimensional elements, need to concur within the system. So therefore, do not dismiss some of the information that comes through. This is directed purely at the channel at this point of time. Some blockages can be presented and others can be unblocked if only change, which we have spoken about this evening, needs to concur within the child as well. So Robin needs to change his ideas about channeling some third and fourth dimensional stuff, because at times it will become important. Not quite sure when, but that was a lesson for him, because he really didn't want to do it. But that was what came through. And I'm sure that many people who perhaps lost people in that will be able to understand that, they didn't die. We don't die anyway, we just wake up in a different dimension. There is no living, there is no dying. It's just incredible amount of probabilities and possibilities wherever we find ourselves. I think that will do for this week, Sam. I hope you've enjoyed it. I love reading back the work that I did with Margot and Mary. I don't do any of that work today, and I miss it. But I've been told my job is just to be these days, to be and shine the light. So I go down the town and shine the light.